Hello, welcome to the Saroy channel. I'm so glad you've joined me this evening, and I've got such a lovely story for you to listen to. So let's get started. Dear Sarah and all your listeners, if you had told me 5 years ago that Bigfoots were real, I would have never believed you, not in a million years. Such an idea would seem preposterous to me. I am by nature a very cynical person who needs to have evidence before I believe in anything. But now I know differently, so the huge cynic in me has been well and truly challenged. I work in New York City as a city broker, and most of my time my schedule is hectic and overwhelming. I spend a lot of time on the computer or sitting at a desk on the phone to important clients. Sometimes I take clients out to dinner or lunch on the company, of course. I would return to my flat in New York after a day's work in the city, really feeling drained by my heavy workload, because it was never ending. I was exhausted and overwhelmed by my job, and my wife insisted I visited the doctor because I was starting to experience sleeplessness and I was tossing and turning night after night. She was very worried about my health and insisted that I went to see the doctor. Begrudgingly, I agreed to a medical, and the doctor told me that I was seriously overweight, that I had fatty liver disease, high blood pressure, and I was at risk of developing diabetes. I was shocked, to say the least, because I had absolutely no idea how unhealthy I had become. I knew that I had to do something about it. If you go on this way, Bob, my doctor said, you will have a heart attack before you're 40. Do you not want to be around for your kids when they've grown up? I was horrified. The doctor was telling me that if I did not get healthy soon, I might not be around for my children. That was my final wake-up call. What was the point, I thought, of a high-powered job if it was driving me into an early grave? I confided in my brother about my failing health, and he suggested I took a month off away from even my wife and kids and go on a solo retreat to stay at his newly acquired little country cabin in the woods in Pennsylvania. I had not been there before, but I did not need any persuading. I decided I would use this golden opportunity to get fit, revamp my diet, and get some well-needed rest. So that is exactly what I did, and I have never regretted that decision. When I arrived at my brother's cabin in the woods, I was amazed how remote it was. It was quite literally in the middle of nowhere, and there was no human habitation for miles around, and the nearest town was an hour away. On the first night, after chopping wood, I made a fire and sat down to a healthy meal, void of any carbohydrates, and no puddings for dessert. I hated being on a diet. It really sucked. And worse still, I was not allowed any beers, which was a real bummer, especially in such a beautiful setting like this. I retired to bed, and I was awoken to these strange sounds coming from the wood. It sounded like children's voices chattering excitedly. I did think this was odd, as there were no people around, so I do not mind admitting I was a little spooked. The whole experience seemed somewhat supernatural to me. The following morning I took my brother's mountain bike for a ride down a hiking trail, and it was a pleasant experience. But I have to admit I was huffing and puffing because I was so unfit. Eventually I got off the bike and sat down under a tree, and I was so exhausted from the physical exertion that I have to admit I fell asleep. I'm embarrassed to admit that. I awoke an hour or so later to hear these hushed chattering sounds around me, and as I opened my eyes ever so slowly, I saw these two small bipedal creatures regarding me curiously, like I was an object of great interest. I had never seen creatures like this before. They were about 2 feet in height. They had almost triangular heads with human-like faces, and they were covered in jet black hair from head to foot. They had long arms like a monkey and strong, slender legs. They looked like little monkey people to me. Truly, I do not know how else to describe them. What are they? I kept wondering to myself, and judging by the way they were looking at me, I think they were thinking exactly the same thing about me. They started chattering together excitedly because I was finally awake, and they sounded like children's voices I had heard the previous night. So this was the source of the unusual noise that I had heard the night before. Suddenly I noticed one of the creatures looking at the other intently for a second, and then they both just bolted up to the top of the tree as if they were hiding from something or someone. I looked at them, and they were at the top of the tree, and they really looked like two black blobs in the treetops. I doubt you would have noticed they were there because they were superbly camouflaged. I suddenly heard a sound, and it sounded like something bipedal, but it was heavy and it was walking through the undergrowth, but I knew at once that it was not human. My instincts warned me to run and hide, and that is exactly what I did. I took refuge behind a nearby tree and threw my mountain bike into some nearby shrubbery, hoping that it would not be detected. Then I saw her, and it was a her, because she had breasts. I knew instantly that she was the mother. I would say that she was 7 foot tall, and she was very big. Her chest area was wide, but her hips were slender, and her legs long and lean and very muscular. Her head was more cone-shaped than her kids', but her face was very human in appearance. I could see that she was walking slowly and seemed to be in no hurry. She was chewing something and focused on what she was eating. I watched her squatting under the tree and continued to eat. I realized she was eating a squirrel from the inside out. I watched her two children slide down the tree and rush to her side. Before long, all 3 of them were engaged in the squirrel feast, each taking turns to eat large mouthfuls of flesh, and they chewed loudly. It sounded like they were really enjoying their feast. The mother did sniff the air for a moment and looked around several times, and I was praying, please God, do not let her see my bicycle. She started to chatter to her children, and they responded in chattering voices, and it went on back and forth as if they were speaking in a native tongue. I watched one of the creatures climb on their mother's left shoulder, and the other little creature on her right, and she stood up and walked away with the 2 kids sitting on both sides of her back. I noticed she walked away with such grace and agility. It was extraordinary. I ran to the bush to retrieve my mountain bike, mounted it as quickly as I could, and cycled out there as fast as I could. I realized when I got back to the cabin that I was sweating profusely from fear. Seeing how powerful and intimidating the mother really was had set my nerves on edge, and I did wonder how things would have transpired if she had spotted me, especially with her kids around. I do think the children kept quiet about me so as not to get in trouble with their mother, because the moment they heard her coming, they fled up the tree. I think I was very lucky she did not spot me, but I'm almost sure she smelt me. Maybe she thought a human had been in the vicinity and had gone away. All I know was I was glad to be back safely in the cabin. I just made sure that I exercised from now on the dirt roads after that, and I avoided venturing in the woods again. Staying at the cabin was a welcome break. Sometimes at night I would hear the chattering noises and whooping sounds and the occasional tree knocks, but I wasn't worried because I knew the source of the noises, and providing I kept my distance, I was sure the creatures would not give me any grief, and I was right. I did get some well-needed rest, read a couple of books, stuck to my diet, and exercised a little, and in 1 month I lost 20 pounds and returned home fitter and more relaxed. Naturally, I did some research and discovered that I had encountered Bigfoots in the woods, and believe me, they are real, but I will never in a million years admit that in person for fear of being ridiculed. Hope you and your listeners enjoyed my story. Thank you so very much. Until next time, good night.